Good evening. I'll now call the City of Cannon Falls City Council meeting for Tuesday, December the 4th to order. Roll call.
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
Holst.
Here.
Johnson. Here. Madsen.
Here.
McCusker. And Mayor Robinson.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the council meeting. At this time, the chair will take a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Merle, a second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Brings us to item 5 this evening, public input. Citizens may speak to issues not on the agenda. Before speaking, please give your name and address for the minutes. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone wishing to address the council this evening for public input? Seeing as there is none, or are none, we will move on to item 6, which is Citizens Recognitions Awards. Chief McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the council will recall, previously I've had officers come before to recognize them for their actions. Tonight, what I want to do is recognize a couple of individuals for their assistance provided to the police department. As I laid out in the memo to the council, both of them took actions that really were instrumental in us being able to apprehend suspects. One was involved in several burglaries in our area of Cannon Falls and Dakota County, and the other one was suspects in a burglary in Dodge County. And so this evening, I want to recognize Jay Schoblum and James Pagel. Mr. Pagel isn't present this evening. He was appreciative of the recognition, but felt that he really wasn't doing anything more than what he should be doing, what he felt was right. And I couldn't disagree with him on that. I think that a lot of our citizens do what they think is right. But in these two cases, I thought that the actions rose a little bit beyond just what we normally see within the police department. And I wanted to recognize them for their assistance provided to us and in solving a couple of different burglaries that might not have gone solved, or might have been unsolved, excuse me. So this evening, we do have Jay Schoblum here. I saw him in the audience. If he would come up, I'll give you guys a summary of what happened, and then present Jay with his appreciation award. This was from July 30th, 2010, at approximately 0:45 hours in the morning. Jay contacted Officer Sather and advised that he had saw a vehicle in the 800 block of Mill Street that was traveling with its lights off and then pulled in and parked. He said that the people exited and started walking around the neighborhood, and he recognized it as suspicious, which it was. While Officer Sather was talking with Jay Schoblum, the people re-entered their vehicle and left the area. And Officer Sather had responded and started checking that area. Jay took it upon himself to follow the vehicle and contact the dispatch center and provided updates of where they were, that they went on to Highway 52 North, and where they were. And Officer Sather eventually was able to catch up with them just about Highway 50, where they were getting off and turned to the east. Officer Sather passed Jay Schoblum and activated his emergency lights, and the vehicle, instead of pulling over, started to accelerate and speed away in an attempt to evade Officer Sather. Vehicle turned down Haugen Avenue, traveling at speeds over 90 miles an hour. Officer Sather requested assistance from Dakota County, as well as notifying our Goodhue County Dispatch. Officer Sather would close the distance on the vehicle to a few hundred yards, and that's when the vehicle decided that it was going to pull over and stop just south of 260th. Officer Sather held the suspects at gunpoint until other officers arrived, and then they were taken into custody. Jay then came up to advise Officer Sather of what he had saw and fill in any details that he may have needed. And then after speaking with Jay, Officer Sather told him to contact him later if he needed. During their subsequent investigation between our department, working with Dakota County, we were able to link the suspects to several burglaries, and in fact they had some of the stolen property in the vehicle from at least a couple of them. Fortunately, they had not been able to commit a burglary here in town that evening. Part of the reason is that they had saw a tow truck watching them and decided that they were just going to leave, but their intent was to, commit burglaries in our city. And so for the actions that Jay took that evening, I want to recognize him. And I'll read you what's inscribed here. It's the Cannon Falls Police Department Citizen Recognition Award presented to Jay Scholblum. In appreciation for your outstanding assistance provided on July 30th, 2010, your recognition of suspicious activity and subsequent actions resulted in the arrest of burglary suspects. Jay, I want to present this to you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Pagel is not here this evening, but I will present him with his award privately.
Thank you. And Jay, we'd just like to say thanks. Citizens like you and in the city that help make this a better place for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to item 7 this evening, the consent agenda. Items on this area of the agenda may be adopted or they may be removed and placed on the business area of the agenda for discussion purposes before approving. For those folks at home, I will read the consent agenda. Item A is the just and correct claims for the accounting period ending November the 30th, 2012. Item B, the meeting minutes from the November 8th, 2012 City Council work session. Item C is the meeting minutes for November 20th, 2012 City Council meeting. Item D, meeting minutes for November the 20th, 2012 Council work session. Item E, the Hanson Utility Extension contractor approval. Item F, second reading and adoption of Ordinance 325 and summary of publication amending Chapters 52 and 53 of the City Code concerning sewer and water connection charges. Item G, the pedestrian bridge railing repair. Item H, the January 1st council meeting change. Item I, partial release of the PUD and subdivision agreement for the South Pines addition. Item J, the PEG access technician. Item K, squad car replacement. Item L, the second reading of Resolution 1993, Comprehensive Municipal Plan Amendment. Item M, second reading and adoption of Ordinance 324 and summary of publication, rezoning property to Southeast Campus PUD. Are there any items people were wishing to bring down?
Yes, I'd like to bring down items E and K.
Okay, item E will become item 8C under council business. Item K will become item 8D, which is the squad car replacement. Are there any other items?
M.
And item M, which is the second reading and adoption of ordinance 324, will become item 8E. Mr. Maroney, does item L need to come down too if we're doing that?
You just have questions on the ordinance itself?
On the wording of it, yes.
Probably okay then, just,
Okay.
leave that.
Okay, we'll leave M then. So that'll become item 8E. Any other items? If not, the chair will take a motion to approve the consent agenda minus items E, K, and M.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. That brings us to council business this evening, and we will move to Resolution 1994, adopting the 2013 tax levy and budget. And that will be Mr. Reeves.
Okay, I'll move up to the front for this one. As you know, in the past, we used to have a truth and taxation public hearing where we present the budget. The law changed a few years back, and now we just have to have allow public input at the meeting where we adopt the budget. So that's what we're doing now. So I'll run through kind of the basic PowerPoint we do each year, just giving the broad outline of the budget. Then I'll also go into more detail as far as how the budget fits in with our financial management plan. And then after that, we'll allow any public input if there is any from anyone. And then from there, hopefully answer any council questions and then get the budget approved and adopted for next year. So just starting off well, like what I just said, presentation, comment, discussion, and then hopefully adoption. So our general levy is about 1.3 million. Our debt levy is about 460 million. And then our special levy, which is almost impossible to read, is also about 460 million, or 460,000, sorry. Sorry. So that kind of gives us our total overall levy for the year. And, you know, as you can see, the special levy, basically just takes a look at some of our funds that are outside the general fund, which would be library, fire, EDA, those sort of things. So what's the total levy? What we're proposing is the $2,238,425 from last year. As you can see, it's a reduction. It's about a 3.1% reduction, or I'm sorry, 1.3% reduction from where we were last year. But if you look down, you'll see that even with that reduction, our estimated tax capacity rate is going up a little under 4% again. Reason for that is our market values dropped by 6% from last year. And if you remember the year before, they dropped 14%. Last year, that market value change was due to the state legislature changing the market value homestead credit program. We knew we'd have that big impact. We weren't expecting a 6% drop again this year, but in talking with the county, there was basically about a 15% value drop in residential over the past year. And now also don't forget that the way it's set up in Minnesota, it's actually a year behind. So hopefully we've seen some value gains as the market's kind of stabilized a little bit. So our hope is that'll be reflected in next year's budget when we do things that our tax capacity rate will be getting better again. So I know we've had, when it looks up there, it looks like this big jump, but really a majority of that is because of that market value homestead credit change. And then the difference is just that we're losing value. We still have seen that happening. 15% in residential is a big reduction to have to deal with. But like I said, hopefully we're seeing things stabilize and even get better. Especially we should see that improve with the number of commercial industrial projects we have going on right now. Those will definitely expand out the tax base and should really help improve that number. But again, in comparison, if we weren't either keeping the levy at zero or lowering it, that number would be much worse than what it is right now. So when you take a look, just the real basic summary of the budget, you can see the difference between last year and this year. For the most part, either it's staying the same or it's a little lower. We've got some increases in some of the departments, but those are, for the most part, offset in others. Most of the increases you see are either based on personnel, equipment purchases, or major projects that are being done, those sort of things, as far as changes. Continue on still with the expense, as you can see, not a whole lot of difference. Moving forward, again, we have some departments that are up. For the most part, they're either close to the same as last year, or they're down some. You'll see the major change in expenses is down at the bottom. We've got those, the 2011 project, the West Side project. We didn't have that debt in 12, but we do obviously have that moving forward now. So that's a $200,000 change. Capital project funds, you see the big changes there. Clearly with the streets, it's the East Side 1 project is what's reflected there for that major change. We don't The fire department has a significant drop, and that's because we bought a ladder truck this year, and we won't be buying another vehicle of that size next year, so that's where you see the big change there. And then with the library, of course, building a new library this year, we won't be building another one next year, so you see that price go down, or that cost, I should say, go down. And then with your utility funds, we're seeing the expenditures in the water sewer going down, ambulances up, but again, that's as we kind of ramp up for the opening of the new hospital. We knew that we would have additional personnel costs as we add that third full-time person in, that is reflected in this. Otherwise, our general fund revenues, I mean, basically, we still get a majority of our funds from taxes. So we get 40% of our revenue from our taxes. Local government aid is steadily declining, as we know. We get about 17% of our revenue from the LGA. The other big portion is, of course, Invenergy. Those two together make up a good chunk of where our revenue comes from. And then from there, just our miscellaneous revenue, which is our different fees and things that we charge for services. And we have not done enterprise fund transfers now in a little while. We used to transfer money in from like the ambulance fund. We did one year some transfers in from motor vehicle. We had some extra funds, but none of our funds are operating in a way that we can really do transfers back into the general fund anymore. So we're basically reliant on taxes and local government aid as the majority of our funding, with Invenergy, like I said, also making up a very good chunk of where our revenue comes from. Property tax impacts, oops, I'll put that up on the board in a second. Every year I put that in there, and it's impossible for anybody to read when I shrink it down to fit into PowerPoint. So this year we're just going to put it on the overhead and show it. So I know that's kind of a quick run through, but I'll get into more detail now when we go through the financial management plan and take a look at it. But the first thing, I'm not sure, get this switched. We coordinate our efforts here. All right. So I'll zoom in as much as I can, and then I'll move the paper around. It might be easier. If you look, this was last year, where our net tax capacity in 2012 is right here, that about 3.2 million, and that with our levy shows where basically where the city portion of taxes were. In 2012. Now, if you look what we're estimating in 2014, you know, the big difference is that our net tax capacity went from 3.2 down to about 3. So we lost, you know, a little over, or about $200,000 in value. Our levy itself went down. We have that 1.3% decrease in the levy, but when you couple that with a 6% decrease in our overall tax base, we're still looking at roughly a 4% increase in our tax capacity, or our tax rate. And what that means is that when you see the drop in residential values, that gets passed on to your commercial industrial properties. So when you take a look, your lower end residential values are going to see decreases. Your higher end will see moderate to fairly significant increases. And unfortunately, your commercial industrial are going to take the brunt of the increases. And again, that's not based off of city raising taxes, anything like that. It's just based on our values. You know, if the values of properties drop, you know, the city is doing what it can as far as keeping the levy low or under what it was the year before. But until the property values stabilize, it's just difficult for us to catch up. I mean, we're doing the best we can. You know, you make some progress. The state changes their program. It really gave us a big hit. And then now this year with that drop, but again, like I said, our hope is, and we'll take a look at that in the financial management plan, is that as values stabilize and we see new growth coming in with the commercial industrial projects we have right now, it should drive this tax rate number back down again to where we're at. And then just also to let you know, we're not the only ones in this situation. Red Wings and Broda, they're also looking at the same thing where they're just seeing value drops. So no matter what they do with their levy, it's just compounded by the fact that you're seeing a value drop. So if you have a levy increase, it would just make it worse. At least with us in our decrease, we're cushioning that blow somewhat to the property owners. It's, you know, not necessarily what a business owner wants to hear when they have to take a look at their property tax statement and still see they're paying, depending on the value of their business, anywhere from $50 to $700 more. But it is better than what it could be if we were actually looking at any sort of increases. So with that, I'll move on to the actual financial management plan. Again, this is another big one where it's a lot of numbers and pretty difficult to read, no matter how we set it up. But to start off with, what I'll hit on the very first page is if you look underneath the 2013, let me zoom in, the 2013 proposed, we'll kind of focus on, let me get to the right spot. We'll focus on this middle area here, which starts with line, basically line 35. It's just kind of the bottom end of the expenditures. So what we're looking at here is our total expenses for the year, and then our ending general fund balance below it. So what you're seeing is this 44,000 is kind of what we'd be as far as a shortfall between expenditures and revenues. That's what was pulled from the consent agenda as we talk about the police car vehicle purchases. And the reason, like we talked about before, was we had planned to always purchase police cars. We took a look long-term, and we had factored in for a long time that we'd lease some, purchase some, and slowly rotate into a purchase only. When we got closer now we had included in the old financial management plan the idea of we'll lease this round, purchase the next one. But as we got closer and looked, we've got plenty of revenue, or plenty of money in the general fund reserve to cover the cost. It's much cheaper to buy outright than it is to lease, of course. So that's why we're proposing to use this money for the vehicle purchase, because even with that, we're still going to be left with a general fund balance of 57%. So anyways, that's kind of the general where we end up on line 47 with our general fund balance at 57%. But if we slide further down, there we go. Okay, so if we slide further down that list and you start looking at line 65 and 66, we have no potential new levies for next year. What that means is that we'll take a look at those later. But as we look at our capital plan, we have future purchases in line. Some of those we will lease or we'll bond for or whatever it is, and those will show up on this line. We have nothing that we're doing in 2013 that will require new debt. We'll be paying everything either out of our capital fund or out of the general fund. But so the bottom line is that our net levy for next year is still what we've got proposed tonight for adoption, this number here. And when you look below that, it's a 1.3% decrease from our levy last year. Last year, our levy was 1.7% lower than the year before. We were at 0 in 2011. We were at -2 in 2010. So you can see we've got a pretty strong history of either keeping it level or at 0 moving forward. Now, when you take a look down here, this is where we just talked about that net tax capacity, which is at line 73. You'll see that it has gone up. And that 5.3% increase is because if you look a little lower, our values dropped 6.3%. We lowered our levy by 1.3%. It basically works out that we still see, unfortunately, that increase there. And these are the two numbers that are the things that have affected our tax capacity rate the most. That 14% drop in our tax base last year, and now the 6.3% drop in the tax base this year. So over 2 years, we've seen a 20% drop in our tax base. And that's pretty difficult to deal with any way you look at it. I think we've done still a good job in addressing that the best we can, but I mean, that's just a big number. 20% is a lot of base to be looking at losing. Now, when you look what our projections are, if you take a look back up at line 74, this one, next one over, right here, I'll see if I can rotate this over. It's kind of big for this. Okay. So if you look at that line 74 in 2014, if everything stays according to what's in this financial management plan now, and like we've said before, it never does. You know, our financial management plan, in this one right here, if you look up a couple lines on to line 67, we're proposing that in 2014, we'd have about a 5% levy increase based on the estimated projects in the capital plan, based on inflation, you know, those sort of things. But if you remember back, if you look at these years in the past plans, we've estimated 7%, 5%, 6%, and we've never done that. We've always been either at 0 or lower. So we've never actually done that, but this is a good indicator of what, if we look at worst case scenario, where would we be with the levy? Everything stays according to this plan, inflation's what we think is going to be, that sort of stuff. And even with that, we would see a 4.9% drop in the tax rate next year, or should say in 2014. And the main reason for that is that we're going to estimate 9% increase in our tax base. And that's a combination of new construction projects that are happening, and also we've got a large tax increment financing district that's coming off at the end of next year. So in 2014, that comes fully back on the taxes, and that basically is our whole industrial park. So we'll see a very good increase in our tax base from that. So if, say that we go back to 0 in 2014, and these things all hold the same, what we would actually see is close to a 10% reduction in our tax capacity rate. So we'd be right back down to 65%, which is pretty close to where we were back in 2011 before the state made that change to the system. So even though we've got this jump this year again, if we look out, or in 2013, if we look out to 2014, and I mean, worst case, if things stay with this, we'll see, about a 5% drop. But if we can do what we've been doing, which is holding that levy pretty much at 0, we'd probably see about a 10% drop if all this stays the way we think it should, which, like I said, would get us down to about 65% and get us right back on track to get that number down and moving forward. So even though we've got a couple short-term years of some issues, if we can stay with the plan, we should see that correct itself, by 2014, and hopefully we can continue to work that number down. So that's kind of the big picture with that summary page. If you take a look at the next page, this is where I talked about, when we talked about those new levies. So when you take a look, we've kind of got listed out: streets, public works, police. 2013, we don't have anything budgeted as far as anything new. In 2014, we've got streets, which would be the streets portion of the East Side project. And then we also have some projects in fire. They've got a number of pieces of equipment currently in their plan that they'd like to purchase, and their stuff's expensive. And we've gone through a lot of money in the fire capital plan lately with their ladder truck and then with some other purchases. So if they do purchase everything they need to, we'll probably have to lease a few of those vehicles, and that's where you start to see this number come in. But now again, there's other options too. So when you look at this, one, we may push some of these things out. The fire department may decide they don't need these vehicles for another year. They get pushed out. We don't have to deal with that. Or two, we take a look, do we want to use some general fund reserves for it? Do we want to look at some other way to finance, or to pay for it instead of financing it through leases? So again, just remember that when you look at all these numbers down here, these are all just estimates. And if you went back to, say, 2011's plan, there would have been numbers there in 12 and 13. But because department heads take a look, they push out vehicle purchases farther, we use money in reserve to pay for things, stuff like that. We often don't have these new debt levies, which it says new debt levy, but most often it's usually a lease payment or something like that. So to take a look at the individual funds and their capital plans. For streets, it really is just a project plan. So this is nothing new. You can see that we had the West Side project, the East Side, the West Side 1 project's complete. We've got in 2013 the East Side project's online there, and we also have the interchange project in. So we've got some pretty high number projects in there. But again, we're not issuing debt for all of that. I mean, we're paying for our portion of the interchange project through the general fund. We've got some levy tied because we will obviously have some levy with the East Side project. But for the most part, none of this has changed. We're on track still with the projects moving forward, which when you take a look at means that we've got East Side 1 coming up next year. We've got West Side 2 on schedule for 2015, East Side 2 coming on for 2017. And then we've moved on to North in 2019. So we still have it laid out that way. So when you look at the front page and all the estimated levies and things, all this is factored into that. So if for some reason we decide that we want to do West Side 2 in 2016, we can push that out. Right now, we're keeping it according to the plan that we had in place, but it doesn't mean that any of these things can be moved. This is all just kind of a plan and something for everybody to look at and understand that when you make a decision, it does have some long-term effects on the overall budget in the future that we should be aware of. Next one we've got is the police. Taking a look at the police in 2013, this is where you start seeing what we're talking about tonight. We have the squad car replacement, we've got the admin car replacement, we've got the setups for those vehicles, looks like some, and other squad equipment. So, I mean, we've got a fairly significant expense of $60,000 budgeted for next year, and that's where we're coming in with that increased transfer from the general fund of about $58,000, which will still leave them a little short, but if you look out long-term, as the transfers that we're proposing, plus working in some leases, if we need to, the fund will, it will stabilize. But that's where, that's what we looked at. We originally had in the plan that we were gonna lease the vehicle this year, but then when we took a look, long-term cost of leasing versus just taking general fund reserves, which we have, and buying it, we save much more money that way. So it makes more sense to purchase it outright, use the general fund reserves, still leaving us, well over 55% in the general fund reserves, which is good. So that's the police plan. Fire, here's where you'll see we have some leases worked in. They've got some significant purchases if you look at the 2012 number. We've got the ladder truck in there. There's a grass rig that they haven't purchased yet, but they still would like to purchase. That'll probably get actually pushed into 2013, but just know that that's next on their list as far as the desire to purchase. And then when you look at 2013, we've got a new rescue vehicle. They've got a new hose truck. They've got Jaws of Life. I mean, we've got, this year we had roughly $445,000 in expense, capital expenses for fire. Next year they're looking at $212,000. Although, if you look from there, we really don't have anything on the books until 2018. It's just that we have a lot of vehicles that are about the same age, and now is a time for replacement. So we have a plan for this next year of this amount, which means that we would lease a certain amount. For the plan right now, we factored in the whole amount, but because of what they have in there, we probably wouldn't do that. We'll take a portion of it. We'll buy, say, one of the vehicles outright using their funds on hand. We'll lease the other one, some combination. But when we take a look at it, we figure we'll put it in worst case for now for long-term planning, and then we can figure it out. Just because their vehicles are so expensive, if something happens to one where we need to do a replacement sooner, it's better to have a little more money in the fire fund just to cover those costs. Next one's ambulance. Ambulance at this time, nothing that they do is tied to the general fund. They're still self-supporting. They're still technically paying for all their own equipment and things now. Depending on how revenues come in, at some point we may actually have to transfer some money for the general fund to help cover some of the expenses there for their capital, but at this time we're not planning on it. If you look, they really don't have anything online in 2013. 2014 is their next big year. That's when we're assuming that we need to get another ambulance, which is at basically a $200,000 cost. Now our hope is we have it set up for 2014 because with the new hospital opening in 2013, we expect a fairly significant increase in revenues with transfer fees and things. So we're hoping that we can definitely build up a pretty good fund balance in 2013 to help cover and transfer in to cover that cost for that new ambulance. Now, if it doesn't come in as much as we thought, or whatever the reasoning, or whatever happens, we may have to look at then covering that either through some sort of lease or a transfer from the general fund to help cover that expense. But again, that's out in 2014, and kind of got to wait and see how things go for that next year with the new hospital opening. Admin, again, we really don't have a whole lot of major purchases on track. We've got a number of small things for next year with new computers, servers, a new printer, copier, things like that. 2014 we do have carpet replacement on there. Things are placeholders. That'll probably get pushed out again. I don't necessarily see a need for that. And that's also when you look at 2015, when we've got like our building maintenance, our heating, air conditioning system, things like that. We're actually working now with the state on some guaranteed energy programs where if we do efficiency improvements, we're guaranteed to save X amount of money over a certain period of time to help pay back for new equipment and stuff. So A lot of these are just placeholders. We assume the cost, this is what it is, but we're hoping that we'll either be able to get some funding to help pay for it, or we push it back. Parks and Trails, kind of the same situation, not a lot. Really, next year, we always factor in some repairs for the pool, and we also have a lawn tractor in there, which I think actually we'll probably finalize the purchase this year. And so, but regardless, it shows up there. They have the funds on hand for the purchases for next year, and then, moving forward from there, we've got in 2014 that we could, we'll do some work on the pool parking lot, and then we'll repair some shelters and bathrooms and stuff, again, placeholders. We'll have to see if we really need to do those things at that point in time. We're not sure. Library, pretty much took care of the library this year. There's not much more to do with the new library and things that we're purchasing for the inside of that. So as you can see, with the library moving forward, they really don't have any capital purchases of any significance out long-term at all. We're pretty well set for a long time. And so basically what all that means is, as a council, going back to the main page, if everything would happen according to what's on these following pages, we purchase every piece of equipment that's on there, we do every project that's on there, all those things that are on there, if that's what we did, what would happen is all in line, basically 67 and 68, or 66 and 67. That's what you'd be looking at seeing, okay, so if we did everything completely on here, here's what the impact would be. In 2014, we'd have about a 4.8% levy increase. In 2015, it would be 5. 2016, it would be 12. 2017, it's back down to 6. 2018, it's 0.5. But again, it's just estimates. As we've known from the past, we usually take that capital plan, we move things around, we push things off, we find different ways to finance things. But for you as a council, it's just good to know that you can take a look out long-term and make some decisions too. If you look out at 2014 and you say there's just no way we're doing a 4.8% increase in 2014, at least you can see why that increase is there. You can get an idea of, well, we're estimating it because we're assuming that there's a 3% expense increase. And we're assuming that we're doing all these different capital projects. And and that way you can tell that, okay, here's what the plan is and why that it could potentially be that way. But as you know, your direction is what supersedes this. So as you come into 2014 and you say, no, we don't want to see that, we want to see the zero again, then that's what we'll bring back. And that's what we'll work to get to. So, again, it's just a plan, but it's something that's good for, at least as a visual reference, to see of where we could be at, in the future with all the, and the more important part really too is you can take a look at each department's individual capital plan and get an idea of what's in the future that we need. Again, we don't necessarily need them on the dates that they're on there, but we will need that equipment at some point. So we know that it's out there, we know that we have those needs, it's just it kind of depends sometimes on when we have to do that. So, with all that, I can take any questions if you have any. Otherwise, as far as the final budget, it hasn't changed anything from when we talked about the last work session. We did take that $25,000 out of that kind of reduction, and we used it as a transfer to the water fund so we can decrease the water rate increase for next year. So that's all factored into this. So nothing's really changed from that last conversation.
Well, it looks pretty good on paper, but some of this is due, as you know, Aaron, to unique factors that won't be repeated in the next couple of years, are refinancing of bonds and some other new businesses coming in. But there's a lot of spending, and you spoke of a lot of transfers from the general fund too. There must be cost. Was there any thought of cost cutting expenses?
Well, when we take a look at the long-term plan, we always want to kind of assume worst-case scenario. So that's why we put in there increases. 3% is kind of our standard for our expenses, is that we're going to increase our expenses, which are basically just our general operating expenses, 3% each year. Now, we don't do that. I mean, mostly we've been reducing those, but we want to make sure that when you look at this hopefully, when we get to that year, if we did everything on here, we're pretty close. We don't want to come to the year and be way under, because we just assume that, you know, we'll make it look better on paper now, and then when we actually get to it, have to come back and say, no, unfortunately, the reality is this. So we do have some things factored in here that are definitely very conservative, and what we hope will be worst-case scenario.
Right, no, that's good, but I also think that there should be some more thought given to stretching out that timeline about our project, about the timeline for our projects.
Yep, and that's definitely an option too. Like I said, this reflects that every 2 years, we're doing fairly major projects. So if we decide to push off West Side 1 by a year and do it in 2016, that's fine, and then that'll adjust everything on, you know, on the plan off a little bit. And that's, we can definitely do that. And I think that's why each time we have one of these projects, we bring it to the council, we evaluate it, is it worth doing right now? Is it, the, you know, the best time? And that's what we're doing now with the East Side project. You know, we're moving it forward, but until we get the bids in, we don't know for sure that we'll do it this year. I mean, if the project bids come in very high, the council's got to make that decision. Can we afford to do it now? Or is it something we need to wait a year and hopefully we'll be better able to pay for it then? So we'll have to definitely do that with each of those projects.
It's good that there's more businesses coming in, of course. They'll have the, you know, the hospital, and there'll be other things, the industrial park. But that's also, I mean, it'll be a net increase for us for taxes, but there's also an increased expenditure for the city to do, I mean, utilities and police and public works and things like that.
Yeah, we hope that we factor in with that 3% increase that we cover those sort of things, but we know for some specific ones, like with the hospital, that's where you see that ambulance, pretty big increase. We knew that kind of coming in, that they would have a pretty strong impact, and that's why we added that third person this year. That's why we're looking at that new ambulance in 14. So we planned for some of it. For the other ones, you know, it's hard to say what the true dollar increase is when we get these new developments. So that's why we hope that with that 3% expense increase, we kind of cover that with the new growth. But if we know specific items like the hospital that we know will have direct impacts on a department, we definitely do plan for that, and that's included in here then.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do know that if we went back in time, say 4 years, and looked at this document from then and compared it to now, you'd see quite a bit of change in our favor, the city's favor, in comparing those from the past. So I think staff did a good job on this.
They did a good job.
Any other questions for Aaron?
Hey, Aaron, is our reserve at about 57% now? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's actually it's more than that, but if you improve the squad car purchases, it will be at 57%. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's 57% is after that $44,000 transfer over for the vehicle purchases.
And, you know, we're always talking about the reserve, and we're always talking about the cap, the fund, and we gotta take a little for this and a little for that. You know, one time we did have that cap, the fund, up to, I think, almost 90%, and then we had the state thing, where we didn't know where we were at. We finally got that out of there. And, I can remember the first years I was on the council, that was always about 32%. And when I was at 32%, Phil's leg used to jump. And then I remember you saying that either recommendations or something, it should always stay around 50% or something.
Yep.
But I've always kind of wondered why that is, and I don't know what we're going up on our storm sewer fund or any of that stuff this year. We talked a year ago when the water went up what we could do to try to keep that revenue neutral, and in a year's time now, we managed to do that. I assume our sewer fund is gonna go up this year.
Yep.
And I guess the one thing I think about is it a bad thing if you take 2 to 4% out of the capital fund to keep the sewer fund at neutral too? Why is it so important that we stay above 50%? I think most families out there would love to have half their budget sitting around with nothing to do with it.
Yep.
So it seems kind of high to me, and I realize that over the years, I keep thinking, you know, we did them bond things, and I've been listening to you. Now we got this tax base coming on in Industrial Park, we got Casey's, we got the Boulder project. We got a lot of things that are gonna really help our tax base next year again. And I think about all that stuff, and then I think in 2015, we're dropping one of our big loans or something. That's gonna really help us out. And I think about, that we do have the fire hall basically in good shape now, and that shows up on your reports. So that's something that shouldn't be milking off us for quite a few years now. We're gonna have the library thing at a neutral level and not be spending money on roofs and rooftop units and stuff like that. So when I look at the whole overall picture of this thing, in 2 to 3 years, we should really be in good shape. So my thinking is, why do we have to keep this, raising these sewer and water rates and keep this reserve so high? Why can't we do more to balance that out?
Right. So back to one of the original ones is the state recommends you have it between 35 and 50%. That's the state recommendation. One is for cash flow. I mean, we only get really revenue in twice a year when we get our tax settlements. So one's cash flow, and then the other reasoning is just because of some of the uncertainties. If you remember back in 2008 when we had our first round of unallotment, and the state said, we're promising you this amount of local government aid, and then in December they said, nope, we're going to give you this amount instead. And there's no way you can change a budget in December. Your year's done with. So the only way you can do anything is to use reserves to pay for what you've already spent that year, because you were anticipating money coming in and it didn't come. So that's why we've been on the higher side with that 55%, just because we don't know where the state's going to be at. We still don't know where the state's going to be at. We still don't have any sort of long-term fix for the state budget. And so until the state actually has a long-term plan in place to stabilize their budget, we really don't know for sure where we're going to be at. I mean, this year's, the 2013 budget anticipates we'll get all the local government aid that was promised to us. That could or could not happen. We don't know for sure. The state will need to address that this session. How they do it, I don't know. Reductions in local government aid could be part of that. So until the state settles out their issues, we need to tend to err on the higher side of keeping money on hand, just in case they come back and say, nope, you're 200,000 short this year. We're not going to give you that. And we need to make up for that. We have the cushion to do it. Now, when you talk about the fund itself, we have been using it. I mean, we're taking $1 million of it and we're using it for the interchange project. We're taking a look now, like I said, this time at some vehicle purchases. Use of the general fund reserves, I would say the smartest way to do it is for one-time purchases. If you start trying to help the cash flow of fund, like a utility fund, it's not a long-term answer. You may be able to reduce the rates one year, but then they're right back up again the next year, and you don't have that money there. The one thing that I would recommend against as far as transferring from general fund into your utility funds is that the utility funds are designed to be self-supporting. So users should pay for the costs associated with having those operations, water, sewer, storm sewer, those sort of things. And the reason that we're in this boat of these large increases is because we did some pretty large-scale utility work a number of years back, but we never adjusted the rates to account for that. So, and then we also didn't transfer in money from the general fund to account for it. So what happened was we had utility funds that were in pretty good shape financially that over a number of years, because the rates weren't sufficient to cover the costs, we saw their balances drop. So we had basically no money in any of these funds anymore. And that's where in 2007, 2008, the city had to take a strong look at what do we do with these funds and how we fix them. And that's when these rate increases were put into place. And they do continue out for another 3-4 years before they drop off. But at that point in time, we'll be where those funds should be, which is self-supporting. And that's what your point of having utility funds is that they should support themselves. If you're transferring money from the general fund into a utility fund, that means that people that don't use as much sewer, water, whatever, are helping to subsidize those that do. You have the fees set up to cover the operational costs. So that's why we do have to see these increases, but they don't go forever. They do balance out, and then eventually that fund is where it should be. If we would have done this from day one, when we first did these projects to cover all the costs for the debt service and things like that, you would have saw very minimal increases, and people wouldn't have really noticed. But when you wait 5, 6 years to do it, you've got to make up this big hole that it came from. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it. You know, the council can take how much money they want and transfer it into the water or sewer fund to help lower those rates down. Will it have is that the best use of that money? You know, that's kind of up to the council to decide. But as far as if you want to see that general fund reserve, say, from 57% down to 45%, what I would recommend then is that we take a look at this capital plan in the future, and every time we do a vehicle purchase that we were anticipating maybe leasing for, we just buy. And we buy down that fund with these one-time purchases until we get to a point where you guys feel comfortable with it at 45% or 40% or 50% or whatever it is. And that way you're using one-time money for one-time purchases. The only issue that you have is when you use reserves for operational expenses, it's not sustaining. You can only use so much of it until your operational expenses continue on, but the reserves at a certain point are gone. So that's why I like to try to tie the reserves to one-time purchases. But that would be, a completely acceptable plan, is that if the council feels that there's a better number to be at besides the 57%, that we just take a look at this capital plan long-term, and anytime we see where we have anticipated a lease, we cash. So we buy vehicles for cash as they come up, get that fund down to wherever you feel comfortable with, and then move it forward from there. And then I still would have to say that I do recommend for the utilities that when you can look at, savings here and there, that's okay, but the only answer is to stabilize those funds is to get the rates where they should be.
I like your advice, and I like to have this thought about now so we can think about it next year. But I would argue a little bit with you on the true cost of our sewer and water expense. Because if we sit down and take out what has happened with that housing development up there, the expansion we did to handle that, and then it didn't happen, that is a figure that should come off of our true cost, but that is built in there, so that's why it's up. So that's my thinking there, is that, if we had the true number of our overcapacity that we're carrying right now for future things, and the money we lost on that development thing, because that isn't going to happen, that is actually our true water and sewer cost, and maybe we wouldn't be going up 5%
Right.
every year. So there's that cost factor in there too, that I kind of wonder if it's a true figure. The other thing I wanted to ask you for budgets that we should think about in the future is, when you first came here, I thought it was also, it was amazing, and for me as a new person, and we talk about budget, and the state was cutting, and this was happening, and how the heck are we gonna do this? And all of a sudden you'd walk in here to one council meeting and you say, I don't know what happened, but there's this 401 account. And here all of a sudden we'd find 400,000 that we didn't even know at the time was in that account. And a lot of them counts bailed us out through the tough times, the last couple, prior to 2 years or a year ago or something. So now we've kind of taken the direction where we aren't putting anything in them kind of funds. The past councils must have did that for some reason. And I guess the other thing I think about, we can strictly put it in the general fund and have the high reserve number, or should there be something put away, 10,000 a year for the next 10 years, to having a special fund like that again? We haven't gone back to that, and I was wondering why the past councils did that before.
Well, in the past, what was, a lot of it is that a lot of projects would be lumped into one fund alone. And so when I came on and started, I kind of been used to doing things differently, where you can get a better true cost per project by having individual project funds and things like that. And what happened before is that all the projects are kind of run out of one fund. And so when a project would get done, there might be some funds left over, but there was 2 others going on at the same time. And we never really took the time to split them out, figure out what projects were in here, what's been paid out, and what's left, and what can we do with it. And that was just one of the things that I did when I came in, was just that, past administrators did things differently. And what I like to do is be able to see the true cost for each project standalone. And that way you know where things are at, and when a project's done, either you're short, you're right on, or you're over, whatever it might be. And then you can close that project out, get it off the books, and move on to the next one. And what was happening is in that case, is we just had a whole bunch of projects in one, they'd close, new ones would start, the fund balances would just kind of float around in there, and that's when we split that thing out, Linnell did a real close look at where's everything at in there, and that's where we finally closed that fund out and distributed the funds where they were supposed to go. So we shouldn't have that issue, going forward anymore, because everything's all split out nicely, and it's very easy for you to understand and for me to understand, because I don't like it when I can't understand it. And when I came in, I'd look, and Linnell would try to explain it, and she had it kind of split off on her own inside things, but it wasn't, I couldn't understand it. And so I didn't like that, and that's when we fixed that. And, again, it's what past administrators said, that's how they set it up, that's how they did it, and it worked fine. And it's just, I like to look at it maybe differently, just so I know and have a good handle on where everything's at. So I don't think we'll see that, kind of moving forward anymore. As far as true costs for utilities, it's hard to say, because yes, you do work in anticipation of growth and things, but then at the same time, if we hadn't done that work, at some point here, we would have had to improve the wastewater plant anyways. And the later you do that, generally speaking, the more expensive it is, especially now with the new regulations that have been coming on over the last 5 years or so. So we did it earlier than we needed to, but it still would have had to been done at some point. And the only saving grace by doing it earlier is it probably was cheaper.
Well, I think the sewer plant
yeah,
is one of the greatest things
yep.
the past councils did.
Yep.
I think the water thing, we're oversupplied
Yep.
on a lot of things with the water. But no, your point well taken. It's just stuff I wanted to bring up for some of the new council members to think about next year, because it does help sometimes to be on here a year or two and go through a budget before you completely understand all this stuff.
Well, I don't know if you ever completely get it. But yeah, and I think maybe one of the good things that we should do is that, next year when we start talking budget again and things, is that maybe we should take a look at, we'll get the audit for 2012, we'll know exactly where we're at with our general fund reserves, and maybe we should have a discussion about where you think we should be with that number. And if you think that if things hold the way they are and we're at 57, if you think we should be at 50 or 45, let's take a look then with what that money is, how much that is, and let's fit it into the capital plan as far as, well, where should we use it? How should we use it? What should we do with it? And let's get that spent down to that point. And that might be a good way to do it.
I think that's a good point, Aaron, because I would like to do more of that when we have our first budget meeting. It's kind of like we get all these papers thrown at us and says, okay, here it is. And then everybody looks at each other, and then we walk away. I would like to see where each council member does take a piece of paper before, a week or two before this, and even turn it into you and say, this is what I would like to see.
Sure.
Our budget. And then we actually sit down and talk about everybody's different ideas, where they'd like to go. I'd like to see a little bit more of a discussion instead of just the plans all thrown at us here, they're there.
Maybe the good thing to do with that would be is before we have technically our first budget work session where we present the budget, we'll hold one where we just talk with the council about where do you want to see these numbers? And that'll give us a little more framework to move it in. Because generally what we've done is said, department heads, give us what you want. We'll put it all in there, and that's what we present to you and say, here's everything we want.
Right.
And then by the time we get to the final, we get it down to here's everything we need. So next year we'll revise that, and that first meeting will be no numbers as far as proposed budgets for 14. It'll just be here's where we're at in 13. We'll have the audit, all that sort of stuff, and we'll discuss, okay, what do we want to do for next year? What are
I
our
think we
goals
did that
for
the first year I came on, and we kind of did
Yep.
that ahead of time
Yep.
before we actually, before we started throwing numbers together. We said, okay, this is where we're at, this is the direction we need to go, and go from there. So probably wouldn't hurt to do that again next year as we start. But any other questions for this year's
Yeah, I
budget?
got one. Okay, if you were at 45%
Yep.
versus 57, does that help our credit rating?
No, I mean, generally the higher the fund balance, the better in the eyes of credit agencies, because that means if you hit a bad slump, you can still pay them. So they like to see you having more cash on hand. Now, 45 isn't low, so I don't think it would necessarily seriously hurt us, or would it? I don't know. Well, without Northland, and maybe others can talk to that, what they think about that, but I don't think it would really negatively affect where our rating is right now. But generally speaking, the rating agencies like to see more money, the better, as far as cash. Because then they know if you hit a bad stretch, you can still pay off your obligations.
But then you get better rates usually and
Right.
everything, right?
Yep. So that'll be something we'll have to take into consideration too, so it doesn't get too low.
I would just add that, as long as they got the chance to throw in a little jab here, that it would be nice if, that we brought this stuff up next year to think about if you'd stick around so you could work with us on it. Okay, thanks.
That's what they call a leading question.
Okay, any other questions for Aaron on the budget?
So
If
the
not,
last part would be is there's any public input, and if not, then we can adopt.
is there anyone here that would like to talk about the budget? Seeing as there is none, the chair will take a motion to approve the resolution as presented adopting the 2013 levy and budget.
So moved.
I'll second that.
A motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Approved. That brings us to item 8B. Mr. Reeves, the water and sewer.
Okay, so I had the chance to go through where we reduce a budget and do the fun stuff, but for the utility rates, I'll let Rebecca from Ellers discuss that.
Oh, he's going to throw you to the wolves.
I'm Rebecca Kurtz with Ellers and Associates, and just to backtrack quickly to that question on the rating, I would agree with what Aaron had said, that if you stay within that recommended guideline, we are not seeing rating agencies change ratings because of that. I would guess if your reserves decrease, there may be a comment.
Shut that off, sorry.
I'm sorry. There may be a comment in the rating report, there may be a couple questions, but if you are staying within that recommendation for what those fund balance reserves are, we aren't seeing a decrease in that affect the rating. So I think that could definitely be something you could have a discussion on without impact, as long as you maintain a certain level at least. With that, then moving on to the utility rate analysis, I think that Aaron did a nice job of talking about how the rates, utility funds are meant to be enterprise funds, standalone and self-supporting. Although ultimately, as he said, that is a policy discussion as you move forward, if there would want to be general fund transfers for any purpose. At this point, we have not factored those in, and we are assuming that we are working toward the goal in the water, sewer, and storm of having them all self-supporting in the long term. I will start with the water fund, and this year, with it being such a dry year, of course, that leads to more watering of lawns, and therefore, we did see a fairly significant increase in revenue than what we had projected from past years. And so we are ending the year with an anticipated cash balance of about 1.38. As you recall, as we had looked forward on doing the projection for the funds, in order to maintain and meet the target that was set up and maintain the funds that were needed, we were looking at about 5% increases annually. Because of the stronger revenues coming in for 2012, we were able to, or are recommending that the city reduce that for 2013. So we would look at or recommend a 2.5% increase in rates. With that, again, partly that is due to the strong revenue from 2012, but then also from that one-time contribution of $25,000 that was mentioned in the budget discussion earlier. With that, for capital projects, we have continued to look at issuing debt for utilities about every other year. We are projecting that 2013 would be a year where you may be bonding for your capital projects. Specifically in 2013, from the water side, there are some street reconstruction projects that include replacement of water mains, along with the radio system that is looking at being purchased for about $32,000. So looking at capital projects in 2013 directly affecting the water fund of about $532,500. Again, looking forward at every other year for issuing debt in projected 2015, looking at that time, replacing some R&R, a booster generator, upgrading the east booster, and then again, a big larger street reconstruction project in 2015 of roughly $500,000. Looking out farther, just as again, a placeholder in planning, there is a very large project, at this point scheduled in 2018 of about 1.4 million, which would replace the North Reservoir or the Industrial Park project. And so as we are looking at these increases, projecting forward, we are also planning for a large project, when we have to replace that Industrial Park tower, and then even farther out, looking at improvements or expansion of the water treatment facility. At this point, we have it more as a placeholder, I'm assuming, but in 2021. And again, as with the financial management plan and all of these, the farther out we look for dates, the more they are subject to change. And we are able to then also plan for that, though, and look at what we need to adjust in the upcoming years in order to meet those capital needs, other expenses, but also try to maintain and minimize what those increases in rates and other expenses are, or cut expenses that are existing. With the water fund, we are really in a fairly stable environment. With that, we are looking at the total reserves being maintained at very close to where that target is. With all of your utility funds, the policy that has been put in place is looking at having reserves of about 50% of the calendar year expenses plus 100% of the fiscal year or the debt service that is required as associated with that fund. And with that, we are meeting those goals, and again, assuming that 2.5% increase for 2013, but projecting a 5% moving forward. Those goals are being met, and that target is being met with that. With that, you are continuing then again to, along with that, maintain your healthy cash balance of roughly $1 million moving forward, and again, maintaining those goals. Are there questions with the water fund at this point?
Is that a good number, is that a number you guys recommend that we keep the reserve of that much money in these funds? I guess I brought that up there and was for why they're so high. I heard you say something about a certain percentage of the levy or.
50% of your calendar year expenses, and then all of the debt service expenses, 100% of the fiscal year's debt service expenses are what I would say Ellers recommends it, but it also comes from guidelines that are set with the state out there also, and with the Government Finance Officers Association. So while it's not necessarily a personal Ellers recommendation, but we do support and move forward with what recommendations are out there by GFOA and the state on their policies, or recommended policies.
I would assume that that is probably an important part, to have a good reserve and that type of stuff for financial ratings. If that was low, it probably wouldn't look that good for the debt service or something. So is that why you try to keep it at that level?
Yes, part of it, and one of the steps when you are looking at projects and doing a rating call, one of the questions that is typically discussed is what your target is, where you are in meeting your target, what you're doing to maintain those reserves. And with that, they look at, again, your reasoning on why you are maintaining the reserves you have, but also look at what those policies are from GFOA and from the state. And while it's ultimately a policy decision, rating agencies like to see you fall within those recommended guidelines, and therefore helping your either improve or maintain your bond rating, and therefore reflecting that in the interest rates when debt is issued.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the water?
All right. Moving on to sanitary sewer then. Again, going through the same process with that. We are working, though, on the sanitary sewer to get closer and build up those target reserves. It's not quite as healthy and stable as what we do see in the water fund. And so we have, as you know from past discussions, recommended and are still continuing to project about a 10% increase in the rates annually, and we are projecting that that increase would go through 2016. Again, this is something that we look at annually and review, and so it is subject to change. But again, looking at getting to that point where the target reserves are the 50% of the calendar year expenses plus 100% of the debt service. Looking at the capital projects for 2013, again, projecting to issue debt every other year. For 2013, it would be a bonding year as proposed in the plan, with a street reconstruction project of about $300,000, and then replacing a portable generator for $28,000. At this point, we are not anticipating any capital expenses in 2014. And then, as typical in your schedule, doing a street reconstruction project again of about $500,000 in 2015. With that, we are looking at fairly stable capital projects moving forward, about $500,000 in 16. In 2017, there is estimated that a sludge dryer would need to be purchased, which is closer to the $800,000 or $600,000 cost, along with the street reconstruction that year. But then being fairly stable in capital projects moving forward. With that, as I mentioned, we are working toward getting our target with what we are seeing in the fund balance and those, or the reserves, moving forward. So again, recommending that 10% increase. We are looking at estimating only a 5% increase starting in 2017. On the cash flow and worksheets, you can see that on line 85, there still is a deficit, or we are below our reserves until about in 2019 and 2020 is when we are projected to get that fund at the point where the reserves are meeting what the target goal is. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, when you project these costs up ahead, like 10%, so this one year and 10% the other, and you're basing these on costs, are expenses, right?
Yes.
And you're looking at our revenues coming in from past years or some, but you factor in what the inflation rates will be and what we get from our returns from our assets, and what maybe costs will be going up or down depending on circumstances, economic circumstances.
Again, as with the financial management plan, we have projected, hopefully with conservatively and maybe worst case scenario. With all of this, and actually across all three funds, we are projecting revenue increases of about 2%, expense increases at 3%. For 2013, we have projected investment rates at about 0.5%, moving up to 1% in 14, 1.5% in 15, and 2% in 16. So we've tried to be conservative and make some estimates on that. Also on the capital side, as we have looked at projects, we looked at what the dollar amount was if we did it today and have factored in a 3% increase. So as we look at the 2017 project, we have hopefully factored in what the cost may be that time, assuming equipment increases.
Right, but if the economy recovers, hopefully, I don't know if it will or not, but if it does, we'll be getting more returns, and
Right.
and of course, we'll be getting there might be other circumstances also.
Yes,
But-
and we admit, we have not been aggressive on estimating when,
So it doesn't
When the
have to be
economy-
10%, it could be an 8%, 7, 8.
That is
depending on
correct.
circumstances.
yes, correct.
And I agree with about the reserve fund, should be, because you never know what might happen. I mean, there are natural catastrophes that can happen as well as normal maintenance problems that could happen. I mean, so a reserve fund is good, though. I realize that. But I'd just like to give people a little hope in the future. It might not be 10% every year for those years, it could be.
Yes, you are absolutely correct that again, we're looking toward meeting that goal and building up the reserves. And we definitely hope that, as new development happens, as additional connections, charges come in, more users are added to the system, all of those improvements that will come with changes and improvements of the economy will play a role in allowing a lower increase than 10%. And that would be something that, we would continue to want to review annually and factor in.
Right.
Any other comments or questions on the sewer sanitary fund?
The final fund, the stormwater fund, if you recall, is a relatively new fund. And so as we look at this, we don't have a long history with it. It was established in about 2009. And again, similar to the sanitary sewer fund, we are looking at moving toward building up reserves and meeting that target goal of 50% of the calendar year expenses and 100% of any debt that would be associated with that. At this point, because it is a new fund and we are working toward building those reserves, when you look at this, the projected cash balance is, in the short term, high with where that target is. But if you look toward the long term and after the fund starts to stabilize and has some years behind it, we are looking at it stabilizing and meeting the goal in about 2020. With that, we are looking at capital projects in 2013 of just the street reconstruction project, but about 672,000 actually, where we would issue debt for that along with the other utility debt. And then moving forward with between 600, dropping down to 400,000 farther out. But again, every other year doing street reconstruction projects that over time and after the fund gets a little more established, allocating all of that to the stormwater fund. With that, a big challenge, at least initially, whenever you set up a fund, are just some of those acquisition of capital costs and those capital projects and financing those. And so that is part of why it is taking a while to get that fund to where the goal is, like I said, estimated out in 2020. We are recommending, again, a 10% increase in the rates for the stormwater, looking actually as far out as we have projected. So not only for 2013, but through 2020. And then at this point, the cash flow does continue to show that 10%. But as we discussed with the other funds, as we continue to move forward, the fund starts to build up some cash balance and projects start to fall in place. That is definitely something that will be reviewed and may be able to be decreased. The other thing that I would note is differing from the sanitary sewer fund. While we talk about the 10% increase, I definitely don't want to downplay that it is a large number, and the 10% appears to be a big increase. The stormwater rate is significantly lower than what we are seeing. So depending on the type of user and the amount of usage, that 10% could be like 20 cents. So it's a big number. I don't want to downplay that 10% isn't a significant increase. Dollar-wise, it is much less than when we talk about 10% for the sanitary sewer fund. With that, though, we are moving in the direction, like I said, to get to the point of where we are meeting reserves, and it's always takes a little while to get that going with a fund that's only a couple years old, but I think moving in that direction where we will, in the future, be on track with where you want to be on your targets and capital projects moving forward.
Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, then we'll take a motion to approve the utility rate increases presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Opposed? Carries. Thanks.
And then we'll have those officially in the, when we adopt the fees and rates at that first meeting in January, that we'll include everything in that, so.
All right, that moves us on to item 8C, the Hanson Utility Extension Contractor Approval.
Yes, I brought this down this afternoon at our Public Works meeting. We didn't get exactly great news on some of the costs, but we also are still expecting some more bids to come in. And what I'd like to do is for us to table this until we get those additional bids in, and then Public Works can better make a recommendation, because right now they're not very good.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I don't quite know what to do with that, because we've been playing with this thing so long, and part of the problem we're getting into the frost season now, and all the contractors are so busy, they really don't want to touch this thing right now. And this house needs sewer and water hooked up to it. So I guess I'm concerned if we table this and put it off farther. We did mention at Public Works there, Bill and us talked about it, that we have to get this sewer and water to this house. And I'm just worried if we table it, that we put it off another month and then we absolutely can't dig because the frost is in, or the expense gets so high trying to heat the ground up to work through the frost. So I don't quite know what to do with this bill. I understand your recommendation, I know where you're at, but we also talked too that somehow we gotta get this done, or this person is not gonna have sewer and water till next year.
Well, we would certainly hope to have those bids before the next council meeting. And hopefully,
So we could call a special meeting maybe, if you wanna deal with it.
well, a
Public
special
Works
Public
again.
Works meeting if we need to, or over the phone, however we can best do that, and bring a recommendation to the next council meeting. And then we're gonna have, if the other bids come in high, we're gonna have some little soul searching to do.
Yeah, we're gonna have some issues with this, we know that, but to me, the big issue is right now, somebody needs sewer and water. And we will have to deal with this if it's higher and figure out how we're gonna do that. But whatever we can, just to keep it moving forward, I wanna do whatever we can to get this sucker done.
Yep.
Well, and as we discussed this afternoon, that they're somewhat reticent to touch the drilling at this point under the road, so
Yeah,
that's the other consideration that may be out of our hands.
I mean, if we wait another 3 weeks and instead of being 30 degrees, it's 5 above, then we really got a problem. So,
Greg, what do you think on the bids?
Well, I think tabling it isn't tabling what I'm doing. I'm working to try to get a better price to get accomplished what Leroy wants to get accomplished. Bill's just tabling it because we don't have a recommendation tonight. But we're not stopping for 2 weeks.
Right,
We're going to
correct.
continue to work to get the recommendation we'd like.
Okay, so basically, you're just wanting to table it until we can get a few more bids in to see if we can get a better recommendation from the Public Works Commission on getting this done. I mean, we want to get it done. I mean, it's got to get done, but I mean, we need to make sure we have the right,
yeah, I guess the biggest concern I'd have is if He is talking to one outfit that said they would get back to him and consider doing this way and doing it a little different. And we talked about that might be the best possible way. So if they got back to him tomorrow and said, okay, this is the price, this is where it's gonna be, then we're actually gonna sit here again until the next council meeting, when if it could get approved, we could move ahead, so.
Well,
Aaron,
we've
give
got
us
it-
some advice.
Well, we've got it approved at a certain cost. So if we can get it within that cost, we're fine, we can go ahead. Now, if it's substantially above the cost that's been approved, we, one, need to get approval from the homeowner, because they have to pay their share. And then we'd also have to come back and get approval from the council, because we'd be carrying a larger share until we can assess it. So the hope is that if we get a number that's close, we'll go. And if they say we have to start, right away, that's fine. Now, if we get a number that's not close, it's not gonna matter, because we're gonna need to discuss how to handle it. And the homeowner is not gonna want us to do anything either until we can discuss with him how to handle it. So if the number comes in where we can get close, we can go ahead and get going right away.
We have a motion by Bill to table it till the next council meeting or till we can get a good quote.
Greg, how long do you think it's gonna be to get a quote? Is it gonna take you a week?
No, I was hoping for 3 more to get today. I will follow up with those 3 guys in the morning to see where they are. So I'm thinking a matter of days.
Okay, so could we,
Public Works would have to at least approve it and then take it back to,
before our next meeting?
right.
Right, we would have to have a special meeting for Public Works. Unless, as Aaron says, if it's real close, we can go ahead, but as of this point, they're not real close at all. So,
And these contractors that have bid, they can still do it yet this year?
We're getting close to the time where they can't, but the
Yeah.
weather is a concern and is probably reflected a little bit in their prices. But we'll do everything we can to get this done as soon as we can.
And what happens, worst case scenario, what happens, we have to wait till spring?
That's
What
the
is-
worst case, right?
yeah,
That's the worst.
that is the worst
That's
case.
the
Yeah.
worst case. That house sits there till spring, and my concern is, okay, where does the blaming game start in then?
We'll worry about that when the time comes.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what bothers me, though.
well, I think the city did the best it could with the conciliatory gesture of the assessment process, and the homeowner has to come forward a little bit, and
Yep.
Yeah, and we also, even if Greg is able to get some numbers tomorrow or the day after, we also, if we're gonna have a special Public Works meeting, we have to, don't we have to notify a certain amount in advance?
Okay.
And you'll have to have a discussion with Lynn.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion to table it until next council meeting?
So Aaron, will you notify Leon right away about all this, or how's this gonna work? Okay, so it isn't gonna drag on for another week before he gets notified or something? Okay, thank you.
We will table this until next session. Do we need a vote on that?
You don't have a second.
I got a motion to table by Bill,
second,
I have a second by Phil. All those in favor?
Aye.
Not voting.
I,
I don't know what to do.
you have to do something.
I'm not voting.
Well, they can abstain if they wish.
We can abstain, that's true, that's all right, that's okay.
I got 2 ayes. Anybody else gonna? Or
I
just not
can
gonna
do
vote?
one more.
I got 3 ayes,
You got 4.
4 ayes, 5, and 1 abstain. Okay, it's tabled to next meeting.
If you'd been there today, Merlis, we'd have got this solved, you know.
Shit.
We need to have one input on this,
Yeah, probably not.
and we got our big share.
Okay, we're moving on to item 8D, which is a squad car replacement. Bill, you brought that down?
Yes, I'd like to, well, first, I'd like to deal with this in 2 separate issues. First, I'd like to deal with the Tahoe lease. I think we should let the lease end, which I believe is, what, June or something like that, Jeff? I believe something like that. Anyway, and this is no disrespect to you, Jeff, you're the only department head that has a city vehicle to drive to and from home. I know it gets used for other things, but $20,000 is an expense we don't, I don't believe we need to keep that. We went through this whole routine many years ago before you came, I think, with previous police chief wanted his motorcycle to drive around. And, you know, this is obviously a much more expensive vehicle, but you mark in here that you can utilize it to transport the emergency management trailer. We do have other vehicles within the city that can do that if needed. With the new Ford Interceptor utility that we now have on hand, one of the previous arguments was to have the Tahoe for winter months. That utility vehicle kind of meets some of those needs, especially if the second part of this passes. You'd have potentially two, but we're weighing on that later. But I think we should not purchase the Tahoe. And if by chance, Chief, if you need in an emergency basis to go somewhere in your own personal vehicle, we do what we do for other staff members, and we give mileage.
Wasn't-
I think this is really different. I guess, I assume Jeff's original contract or something, this was probably a part of that, this vehicle. I also know he's the chief of police. He can't be running down here in his personal car and then get in a police car and then go out in the call. I also know that if we had fog and had a major accident out in 52, and he got called out and has to go right now, I don't want him driving a Crown Victoria down through the ditch, or if it's a blizzard out when it happens. So I guess this is something, a vehicle we've always had. I was looking at it from the standpoint of more if it made common sense to buy this or lease another one. I didn't think about it from your angle, Bill. And from that angle, I contacted Jeff and Aaron to get more input. This vehicle is 5 years old and it has 40,000 miles on it. When they talked about doing this, I thought it was probably going to be a vehicle that had 120 on it and we were going to buy a lease. And I didn't know if that made any sense. It's supposedly about $35,000 if we got another SUV for him and then had to put the computers in it and everything. And if he's putting on roughly about 8,000 miles a year, I was looking at it from that I thought this was a heck of a buy compared to buying another new vehicle and stuff. And I looked at it that in 4 or 5 years, if we're in a position to do something else or have to do something else, and now he's got 80,000, the thing is still got to be worth 5 to 10 in value when we get rid of it instead of a lease where we take it back and we got nothing. So I guess I'm hearing what you're saying, Bill, and I guess that's kind of thrown me for a loop. I wasn't thinking about that we shouldn't do it all together or something. I think it is the right thing. I do think he needs that vehicle. And it isn't like he lives in Northfield and drives over here. He lives about 5 blocks from the building. So if there's some kind of restriction we want to put on it at his personal time or something, I would understand that. But I still believe he needs that vehicle. And also, if you do buy one of these new ones like we got for the police department, they are all-wheel drive instead of four-wheel drive. And that is to be tested and proved yet too, whether that works out good for us. So I thought this was a good thing. I didn't think about it from the other angles.
You're talking about a scenario in the winter that might happen once or twice, maybe. I'm talking about year-round. We have no other department head that uses a city vehicle. Quite frankly, no. Quite frankly, I don't know why we ever approved it in the first place. This has nothing to do with Jeff's hiring or anything. This was just a decision that was made, whatever, 4 or 5 years ago when we got it.
Yeah, and I think probably, and I wasn't here either when initially it was done, but generally speaking, what you see is with your chief, and even sometimes with bigger department, an assistant or lieutenant or whatever, you will see the take-home vehicles with the police, or if you have like a full-time fire department, your fire chief will have one too. Like if you look at Red Wing, my assumption would be is that the chief and the fire chief there have take-homes. And it's just generally because kind of like, well, what Leroy said is that if there's a call-out or something, instead of having in an emergency, which may happen once every 10 years, who knows? But in that situation, instead of having, the chief drive into City Hall, drop the vehicle, pick up, a police vehicle, head out to it, the thought is that they have it. They're the ones that are ultimately responsible for immediate response. And so again, is it needed? Well, no, until it is. So it's hard to say. I'm not going to argue with Bill that, we don't need it, or that, it's needed and that, it has to happen all the time because we use it all the time that way, as far as the take-home goes. But it is fairly standard that the chiefs do have them. And it's just for that response issue. And like I said, if it happens once a year even, who knows? But,
And
that doesn't mean it's right. I'm just saying.
And I
it's
could
fairly
understand that if the chief lived 10 miles away. As was pointed out, he lives a half mile away. Response time is not the issue of going from one vehicle to another. And I know Leroy, this afternoon, we were discussing ways of trying to save money for the city. Well, you know what, this is one thing that's nice to have, but is not needed.
Yeah, I don't know, Bill. I'm not looking at it as necessarily as nice. I'm thinking more of an accessory. I don't know.
It's a necessity.
Yeah.
I think.
The chief is a little bit different than other heads. I don't care. I mean, sure, Public Works and stuff like that.
I would argue Public Works is probably more important as
No,
far as-
number one is Public Works, if he doesn't live in town or whatever, and there is a snowstorm coming or something like that, that guy should be here. I mean, that's his job, that's the way it is. But his is emergencies and different things, and just him being out, they know who he is, that the police are around. I mean, it's not the same, it's just not the same thing.
No,
It's
well,
public safety.
I disagree.
It's our safety. I mean, police is a lot different than anybody else.
I think it is life and death sometimes.
Yeah.
or Quite often.
Well, we have
And if we
officers
can save
on
one
duty.
life with it, it's worth it.
No, I disagree.
I know.
All right, any further discussion?
Well-
Can we keep it as a one or two, or can
I
we
want
split
to,
this?
I want to separate them.
Okay, so let's do this then. Let's separate that motion. So at this time, we're going to have a motion to approve the purchase of the Tahoe from the state for $20,000.
So
Now, Aaron, is that in our budget and stuff? Is that budgeted in our?
Yep, that's what I talked about. That's that, when you see that $44,000 number, that kind of coming from the general fund to cover that, yes.
And it will still be at the 57, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I have a motion by Merle.
I'll second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
No,
2 noes?
2 noes.
Okay. 4 ayes have it. Okay, that brings us to the second part, which is going to be the purchase of or getting rid of the 2008 Crown Vic.
Okay, I want to go back to something we did, I believe it was late last summer. I believe before we purchase any more major equipment for our police department, it is incumbent upon this council, I believe, to get a quote from the county for services in lieu of our own police department. And until such time as we get those quotes, and we find out one way or another if it makes financial sense, we should not be purchasing any more equipment, major equipment, for the department until we at least look at a quote and then debate the issue of whether, let's find out once and for all, is it worthwhile even looking at the county doing our policing? If it comes back and you're only gonna save a few thousand, of course, then you keep our police department. But what if it comes back and we're talking well into 6 figures of savings? And, I know you can laugh, but I guarantee you it'll come back that way.
Okay, well, we can talk about that later. Right now, the question on the floor is the purchase or the trading in of the Crown Vic for another vehicle, so we need to determine that tonight, and then we'll worry about the other issue at another time.
Well, worrying about the other issue, if you go ahead with this, makes it harder, because then we have another vehicle that we are paying for.
Aaron, you're the numbers guy here. I want to throw some things out to you. I was sitting out there the other night reading about all this stuff, and I got to thinking about these Crown Victorias get 8 miles a gallon, and we're supposed to get 14 with these SUVs. So roughly we got a 6 miles a gallon difference. So I was sitting there thinking, if we're running one of these vehicles and we're running 20 gallons a day through them, and we're getting an extra 120 miles a day out of each 20 gallons that are going through there, if you total that up, that actually comes out with $3.40 gas, it comes out to be quite a bit of money. I'm talking like 150 or 200 bucks a week. And with that kind of mileage difference, over a month's period, it's, you can punch the numbers in for me and get back to me, but it sounds to me like it's a $400 to $500 deal. It's not just like we're saving 50 bucks by doing this. So it's almost a thing to me where it pays for itself to do this, if you really sit down and punch the numbers. So I'm kind of irritated that you could go buy an SUV right now that gets 35 to 40 miles a gallon, and we can still only get 15 out of these. And I think the Crown Victorias should be banned from the market at 8 miles a gallon. So I think there's a heck of an advantage to this. I'm looking at it from the business end, not about another police car or something.
Nope, and that's true, and when we look at the budget for it, I was just asking Jeff about that, and because we've only had this one for a certain amount of time, we want to get a little bit more experience with it to see for sure what our true savings are, but if that's right, and, we obviously look at it the same way you do, that you see those savings in mileage, then you'd see that savings reflected when we start looking at, say, the 2014 budget. As we have been paying this much for gas, but now as we move to these vehicles, we'll see that at least line item in the budget start to drop some. So yeah, we'll definitely be taking that into account when we budget moving forward.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. At this time, we need to make a determination on whether we move forward with this purchase, or whether we table it and talk about it, or which way the...
I make a motion that we go ahead with this purchase.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Merle, and a second by Morris. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
And 1 no, 5 ayes have it. So we will purchase, go ahead and purchase another interceptor when the other lease ends. That moves us on to item 8E, which is the second reading of ordinance 324.
Now, did you bring that down just so I'd have to vote again?
No.
Oh, okay.
Although that's a good thing, though. That's a good thing. No, I was just wondering, Dave, about some of the language in that, one part of this says, oh, where the heck is it now? Oh, yeah, right here. It says, A, purpose. Under Southeast Campus Plan Unit Development District, A, under purpose. Do you have that? It says, purpose of the Southeast Campus is to provide for a hospital campus and uses that are compatible with and support the hospital, to exclude incompatible uses. Now, who would have a veto power over incompatible uses? What does that mean exactly?
The one incompatible use for sure is in section E, the section oriented uses.
Right, no, I understand that, but,
And the compatible uses would be those listed as either permitted or in this case mostly as conditional.
isn't that a rather wide general area that you'd have to?
Well, I would say that the conditional uses are fairly well defined, not necessarily in this particular ordinance 324, but by our zoning ordinance.
The way this is worded, though, it doesn't have the mayor would have a veto power over future businesses, not the city, wouldn't it?
No, it would be
Almost.
the city.
It'd be the city, but it'd be, I mean, if they said, this is not compatible to the city, and the city says, well, look at the words, and they can say, yeah, the words say it's supposed to be compatible, and we don't believe this is compatible.
The hospital or Mayo in this case, since they are the largest single land owner of property within this district, would have a lot to say with respect to compatibility or not, because they own the land, or at least the lion's share of the land. The other three properties that are within this district, those particular property owners now and in the future would also have some ability to propose, interpret, suggest that what they want to do is compatible or not with this ordinance, because there will be some interpretation potentially necessary depending on the uses being suggested.
Yeah, I imagine it would.
But at the end of the day, it's going to be the planning commission, well, first it'll be the zoning administrator, potentially subject to review by the planning commission, and then ultimately back up to the city council if there's a real question on interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, the use is hospital, but it doesn't mean that the hospital owner has any input whatsoever in any of the zoning decisions, other than what any neighboring property owner would have when a zoning decision's made.
Well, that's a formal legal description of their rights and responsibilities, but we both know that informally they would have,
Well,
perhaps-
I mean, if they come in to oppose something, it would have to be based on standards in our code. They can't just come in and say, I don't like that person,
But
so I don't want them to build a
yeah,
building
the
there.
point is the
I mean,
code
they would
is-
have to have something legally defensible, because we can't approve something
No,
or
I
deny
understand-
something if it's not.
I understand that, but I'm just saying the words in the code are vague enough and to allow for a rather broad interpretation.
Well, and I think it was also designed that way too, because we have other property owners out there that we don't want to limit their ability to change, sell their property, do something else with it. So we didn't want to make it too strict where they couldn't use their land anymore either.
No, I'm
So we
not,
wanted to make sure we left it open at least enough that the existing property owners, including the others there, could continue to grow, expand their businesses, start new ones, do something else.
no, that's fine, but that's putting it on the other end. The way I read it, the hospital owners get the majority opinion, but I understand your point,
And whether it's this district or any other, the zoning administrator, if it's myself or Aaron or someone else in the future, if we make an interpretation that you as a property owner disagree with, you have the right in this ordinance, as well as any other district, to make an appeal to that interpretation. And that's just in the balance of our ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, the chair will take a motion to approve the second reading and adoption of ordinance 324 and summary of publication rezoning property to the southeast campus PUD.
So moved.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No. Well, I got it.
5 ayes, have it. 1 no.
After all that trouble, no,
I thought that's why you brought.
Motion carries.
no, it wasn't, actually.
All right, that's time, we'll move on to reports. Mr. Maroney?
The one thing I do want to report to the city council, and Bill and Morris are aware of this, that after the last meeting of the city council, World Food Processing did execute a purchase agreement to acquire 45 acres of land in the industrial park, working through the Economic Development Authority. So with that purchase agreement signed, we'll be working towards the closing and the purchase of 45 acres by World Food Processing yet before the end of this year. And they are required under the sale agreement to begin construction and complete construction of their project
in 2013. So we're excited about the progress made. And that does take a lot of the existing inventory of land that the EDA is marketing in the industrial park out of the picture now, and we'll be left with 3 or 4 parcels that we'll continue to try to move to other prospective buyers into the next year as well. So that's a good thing. Also, the EDA closed on a loan to assist Art.org, which is a nonprofit art organization, to purchase and renovate the former bowling alley facility in the downtown area. That loan was closed last week. Art.org is already publicizing not only their purchase, but how excited they are to be within the city of Cannon Falls and joining the other businesses that are very complementary to what they do. So the EDA was successful in closing that loan last week as well. So that's all I have.
Cool.
Thanks.
Congratulations, Dave.
Yep.
Hey, we, council members didn't get any free food for that going out there, did they?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for asking.
Greg? Chief?
Nothing.
Merle?
Nothing.
Rod? Bill?
Oh, sure, I do. You know, in my time on the council here, everyone sitting up here, I think by and large has done a very good job. However, with tonight's earlier discussion, I think the council gets an F for not looking at ways to look at saving additional funds. There is nothing wrong with getting a quote from a county on policing services. Why we do not at least look at the numbers, there's absolutely no harm in looking at these numbers. And if they come back and warrant a further discussion, then do so. If they come back and it's not worth looking at, then we don't. But then we'll know. But that is the one area that I'm afraid that all my colleagues up here have got blinders on. And I don't understand why you people are so afraid of looking. I think you're afraid because you know that the numbers will come back and show that it's something we should discuss.
Bill, even if the numbers did show that, there will still be a great many people in town who would not like to change what the status quo.
But that would be a discussion for that time. But to not look at the numbers is a failure on our part.
I thought it was about 50%, the rough numbers that we did get. I mean, I think it is a large number, but the feedback that I got from people when that did get brought up last time was all negative. They said we owed it to them as citizens and taxpayers to keep the police here, and they said because of the drug problems nowadays and other things. I mean, you talk about these 2 chases they just had here. Everybody comes back to me, Bill, nobody says, I want you to look into that more. So I'm just going by what I get fed to me, you know?
Right, well, when you were referring to the night we did
No,
discuss it?
general population, that people talk to
See,
me
no,
on the street too.
I must talk to different people because I get just the opposite. Because you're looking at trying to, when you look at a quote from the county, you'd look at everything that would include what our police officers do, you know, when we have 2 officers on, when we don't, you know, all those issues that would come up. But failure to look at it, at least to get a number and know. Even if the number comes back and it saves us a huge amount of money, this council may still decide, nah, we're not going to do it. But at least we'll know. I just don't understand the failure to not look at it and at least put that out there.
I don't understand what your push is to go to the county.
Because I'm not pushing for the county, I'm pushing to look for savings for the taxpayers of this town, to get our taxes and still provide similar type services. We know it would not be exact, but that's what I'm looking for.
And you're wanting to gamble with public safety in this town for our citizens.
What you're saying to me then is that you're saying, oh, the sheriff's, they're incompetent. One of our officers just joined the Goodhue County Sheriff's
I'm
Department.
not saying they're incompetent.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Exactly what
No,
you're
I'm
saying.
not. Then you're saying that our police department is incompetent.
No, they're very,
Okay.
no, they're very good.
All right, we'll move on from that, and then we can discuss that at another time.
Well, no one seems to.
Morris?
I don't know.
Phil?
No, I'm just saying, there's, a citizen asked me a question, and it's nothing earth-shaking, it's nothing big or anything like that. Perception, though, often is important to citizens. And they were saying with the high water bills, why are we still watering the parks, and like East Side Park and other parks like that? And they'd like to know why, because, you know, they see that, and then they see the water bills going up, and they wonder how this affects them. I said it wouldn't make very much difference in the budget, no matter what they did, but
Right, I mean, yeah, watering the parks doesn't make a huge difference, but, you know, it is, I mean, we don't have to, but, you know, one of the draws that we do have to get people in the community is our parks.
I mentioned.
And if your parks are dry, dead grass, and this and that, we don't get as many people in, and we look at it as, you know, having inviting parks is what hopefully helps bring people in, shop downtown, visit, come back, those sort of things. So there's a reason we maintain the parks that way. I mean, it's one of the areas we haven't cut because we think it's important to help keep people coming into town to use them.
couldn't we send council members with watering cans out there once a month or something?
Well,
Cut down on.
you're gonna have more time now.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
true,
and
I
you do a
could
lot of
that.
walking.
I could do that.
Okay. Leroy?
So anyway, Robbie, I gotta have a few minutes. First of all, Jeff, not only thanks to the citizens for following up with that stuff, but thanks for the officers doing a good job following that up. The other thing is, I don't know if I'm gonna make the last meeting in December here, Robbie, so, and with Phil leaving, I thought I had to do a little letter and a little roast to Phil tonight here, before we go. So, and I did tell Phil to prepare himself that I had done this, so I gotta read you guys a little something. I wanna talk about, Phil before we go tonight. First of all, I want to thank him for his years of service and his time given to the council and the city of Cannon Falls. I have to talk to you about getting to know Phil since I've been on the council. The first time I talked to him, he was walking on the street downtown, and I thought, well, I'll pull over the van and say, how's it going? Now, I have to mention first how happy I am being such a strong conservative like he is, that he walks a lot and doesn't buy a car, and he helps the liberals with the greenhouse gas thing. So back to how's it going. He stood by the van, he started babbling on to me about something. He was jumping around a lot, and it didn't make much sense to me. And I was kind of thinking, I wonder if he took too many aspirins for breakfast this morning or something. He also decided to tell me about the thing with the fire department, his concerns, and some of the ways things were happening down there, and he thought things could be a little different. Well, the problem was my son was sitting in the van with me, and he's a fireman, and he pretty much did not agree with anything Phil had to say. So I decided I better proceed on and take off. So I told Phil, we'll see you later, and I got to get going. Before the next council meeting, on a Saturday night, we get our papers, and I was sitting there reading all my papers, and I was thinking about Phil. And I thought, wow, you know, I wonder where things are going to go after that first meeting we had here. And not only that, I think I got to sit alongside him. So I was a little bit nervous about where everything was going to go. The one night then, of course, it wasn't very long afterwards, we had an issue with the fire department down there. There was some quality problems, and we were supposed to be charged more. And Phil proceeded on to tell us that he didn't think it was fair and we shouldn't pay for it and stuff. He proceeded on to tell us that when he was a kid, and I still wonder about your age, Phil, he said that his dad built the house, and the lumber was not a very good quality, and his dad took and stuck his fist through the wall and said, I want new lumber. So Phil was just overemphasizing. But I was sitting here in my goofy Irish humor, and I thought to myself, You know what I should do is get up and walk to the back wall here and stick my fist through the wall and say I'm with Phil. But I didn't get carried away. I controlled myself, Phil. So anyway, over the years, I don't know if most of you know that Phil has a few little quirks up here. When the budget used to be at about 32%, his leg every once in a while would start jumping about 4 inches off the ground up here. I always told my wife, I said I had a built-in Richter scale up. When Phil didn't run again, we had kind of a private moment, and this is what, with my daughter, thought I should cut this part out, Phil, but I thought it was interesting. He told me, I seen him outside, and I said, I'm kind of curious why you aren't running again. I think you had a lot to give. And he said, well, you know, I think it's maybe some time for some new people. And he said, maybe some younger people. And when he got done with that, and then he said, you know, I get the feeling once in a while that sometimes there's some people that don't like me. So I told Phil, I said, wow, I never thought about it that way. But I said, I think if you wanted to be liked, you probably shouldn't have run for this office to start with. There can be a little problem there. But I also told him that if a person is crazy enough to sign up and do this job, I automatically have total respect for them. I think of all past council members, administrative people, and people that make a commitment to try to make a difference and be on their local councils. After being on here, I have a whole new respect for everybody. So in ending with that, Phil, I hope your next step in life is a good life. I hope everybody likes you all the time. And if you ever need a friend, I'll tell you, I'll always be there for you. So I want to wish you the best, and I'd like the council to give him a hand.
Thank you very much, Leroy.
Thanks, Leroy. And we'll send Phil off after the next council meeting. At this point, I don't have anything tonight. Just like to say thanks to the council and the city staff and all the department heads for the good job they did on putting the budget together. We do the best up here with what we've got to work with to try to make it the best for all our citizens and to try to lower costs as much as possible. But at the same time, we still got to provide the services. So this time, the chair will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.